Captain Elena Rodriguez stood at the bridge of the colony ship Cradle of Dawn, her dark eyes fixed on the holographic display showing 3 unknown vessels approaching their position. The ship's configurations were unlike anything in their database, confirming her suspicion: first contact was imminent. "Status of the civilian sectors?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. Lieutenant Marcus Kim's fingers flew across his console. "All families are accounted for. We have 242 children and 156 pregnant individuals in the colony pods." "Initiate cradle protocol," Elena commanded without hesitation. Throughout the massive ship, bulkheads began sealing, creating layers of protection around the sectors housing the most vulnerable colonists. It was a distinctly human protocol, one that had raised eyebrows even among their own kind for being overly cautious. The alien vessels drew closer, their sleek forms resembling arrowheads carved from obsidian. No communications yet, but their sensor arrays were actively scanning the Cradle of Dawn. "They're probably just curious," Dr. Thomas Reeves, their xenobiologist, offered from his station. "Their approach vector suggests." The ship shuddered as energy weapons impacted their outer shields. "Multiple hostile signatures detected," Lieutenant Kim reported. "They're targeting our engine sections." Elena's training kicked in instantly. "All power to defensive systems. Begin emergency procedures for civilian evacuation to the core sectors. Priority to children and medical cases." Her orders rang clear and sharp. The alien vessels split formation, attempting to surround them. Their attacks were precise, methodical, until the Cradle of Dawn's defensive pattern shifted. Instead of protecting vital systems or weapons arrays, the human ship's shields concentrated around its civilian sectors. Energy that could have been used for counterattacks was diverted to create multiple redundant barriers around the colony pods. The alien attacks faltered. Through the chaos of klaxons and emergency protocols, Dr. Reeves noticed something on his readings. "Captain. Their scan patterns have changed. They seem confused by our defensive configuration." Elena barely heard him, focused on coordinating with Security Chief Amara Okafor about the evacuation procedures. Across the ship, crew members were helping families reach the designated safe zones, many carrying children who weren't their own. The alien vessels suddenly ceased fire. A communication request pinged their systems. The universal translator took several seconds to process the incoming signal before converting it into comprehensible audio. "Human vessel," a metallic voice resonated through the bridge. "Your defensive priorities are illogical. Explain." Elena exchanged glances with her bridge crew before responding. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the colony ship Cradle of Dawn. We are protecting our most vulnerable members, as any civilized species would do." A long pause followed. "Your species diverts critical power from weapons and propulsion to shield noncombatants?" The alien voice carried what seemed like genuine bewilderment. "Of course," Elena replied. "Children and those unable to defend themselves take priority. This is non-negotiable." Another pause, longer this time. The alien vessels maintained their position but powered down their weapons. "Your tactics defy strategic logic," the voice finally continued. "Yet they suggest attributes we had not considered. We will withdraw to analyze this interaction." As the alien ships retreated, Elena noticed her hands were shaking slightly. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a profound realization: what they considered a basic moral imperative had just completely disrupted an alien species' understanding of conflict. Dr. Reeves was already documenting everything frantically. "Captain, do you realize what just happened? Their confusion at our protective instincts suggests their society might have completely different priorities regarding vulnerable members. This could revolutionize our understanding of alien social structures." "Alert the Earth Colonial Authority," Elena ordered, still watching the retreating vessels. They need to know that our most basic instincts might be our most alien feature to other species. In the following hours, as the Cradle of Dawn resumed its journey, the crew worked to document every detail of the encounter. None of them could have known that their distinctly human reaction, the immediate, unquestioning protection of children and the vulnerable, would send ripples through the galactic community. Among the stars, news began to spread of the strange humans who would sacrifice tactical advantage to protect their young, who built their ships and protocols around sheltering the defenseless. To some species, it made humans unpredictable and dangerous. To others, it hinted at qualities they had never imagined could exist in a spacefaring race. And in the colony pods of the Cradle of Dawn, children slept peacefully, unaware that their safety had just changed humanity's place in the galaxy forever. Elena sat in her quarters that night, recording her personal log. First contact occurred today, she spoke softly. And I can't help but wonder if what makes us human, our instinct to protect our children at all costs, might be what makes us most alien to everyone else out there. She paused, looking out at the stars streaking past her window. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Concordat hummed with nervous energy as representatives from 17 spacefaring species debated the human question. Massive holographic displays showed footage from the Cradle of Dawn incident, along with dozens of subsequent encounters that followed the same pattern. Ambassador Crixtal of the Meridian Collective, their crystalline form refracting light in agitated patterns, addressed the assembly. The evidence is clear. Humans will abandon tactical advantage, strategic positions, even their own safety to protect their young. This makes them dangerously unpredictable. Unpredictable, yes, countered Representative Nixus, her tentacles weaving intricate patterns in the air, a sign of deep thought among the Veldari. But is this truly dangerous? We've observed no human vessel initiating conflict. Their protective instinct appears purely defensive. The chamber erupted in overlapping arguments. The Astral delegation, with their hive-mind consciousness, found the concept of individual protection baffling. The Sorn, who abandoned their young to natural selection, viewed human behavior as an evolutionary weakness. High Admiral Raven Blackwood of the Earth Colonial Authority sat quietly, observing. After 30 years in space, she understood how alien humanity's protective instinct must seem to species with different evolutionary paths. But she also knew it was their greatest strength. If I may address the council, she stood, her weathered face and silver hair reflecting in the chamber's crystalline walls. The room fell silent. Humans were still novel enough to command attention. You fear what you don't understand, she began. You see our protection of the vulnerable as illogical, perhaps even threatening. But consider this, what does it tell you about a species that will sacrifice everything to protect those who cannot protect themselves? She gestured to the displays. You've seen our ships, our colonies, our stations. Everything we build includes layers of protection for children, the injured, the helpless. Not because it's tactically sound, but because we consider it a moral imperative. The Meridian representative's crystalline surface flickered with uncertainty patterns. This is precisely what concerns us. Your species will violate tactical logic for this imperative. Yes, Raven smiled. We will. And that's exactly why you should want us as allies. She walked to the center of the chamber, engaging the holographic controls. Images of human history appeared, rescue workers running into burning buildings, soldiers shielding civilians with their bodies, medical ships braving war zones to evacuate the wounded. A species that will die to protect its young will fight just as hard to protect yours. A culture that builds its ships around sheltering the vulnerable will help you evacuate your colonies in danger. A civilization that considers the defense of the helpless a moral imperative will never abandon allies in need. The chamber grew quiet as the implications sank in. The Veldari representative's tentacles moved in patterns indicating deep approval. But this protective instinct, a Sorn elder rasped, it makes you unpredictable in combat scenarios. Only if you threaten those under our protection, Raven countered. Otherwise, we're quite reasonable. Though I would suggest adding a warning to your tactical databases, attacking human civilian targets is inadvisable. The subtle threat wasn't lost on the assembly. Several species representatives showed their equivalence of nervous behavior. The astral hive mind buzzed in curiosity. Your young require such extensive protection due to their prolonged developmental period. Yet this same vulnerability created the protective instinct that defines your species. Fascinating paradox. It's not just our young, Raven corrected. Humans protect any vulnerable life forms. It's why we have entire organizations dedicated to preserving endangered species, why we rehabilitate injured wildlife, why we'll risk our lives to save even non-sentient creatures in danger. The chamber erupted in discussions again, but the tone had shifted. Species that reproduced in vast numbers, expecting heavy natural attrition, struggled to comprehend this mindset. Others, particularly those with similarly lengthy developmental periods, showed signs of recognition. A Veldari elder approached Raven privately after the session. Your words have given us much to consider, Admiral. Some of us have observed similar protective instincts in our own histories, though perhaps not as intensely expressed as in humans. Raven nodded. Evolution takes different paths, but protecting the vulnerable isn't weakness. It's what allows a species to preserve its knowledge, to learn, to grow. Every child saved is a repository of potential, every life protected is a chance for advancement. As she returned to her ship that evening, Raven received reports of the debate's impact. Several species had already requested human consultation on designing better protective systems for their civilian vessels. Others were re-evaluating their own social structures, questioning ancient practices of abandoning the weak. Computer, begin personal log, she spoke in her quarters. Today might mark a turning point in galactic relations. They're beginning to understand that what they saw as our greatest weakness, our inexplicable need to protect the vulnerable, might be our greatest contribution to galactic civilization. She paused, watching the stars through her viewport. Maybe teaching the galaxy how to protect its children isn't such a bad legacy for humanity to leave among the stars. Somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the Cradle of Dawn continued its journey, its design already being studied and adapted by other species. Humanity's illogical, protective instinct was slowly reshaping the understanding of what it meant to be a truly advanced civilization. The human embassy on Proxima Station was unlike any other diplomatic facility in the galaxy. While other species' embassies focused on defense and security, the humans had designed theirs with large windows, garden spaces, and most notably, a children's cultural exchange center. Ambassador Julia Patel watched a group of alien children interact in the exchange center's main hall. Two young Veldari were teaching a human child their traditional tentacle weaving patterns, while a meridian crystalline child refracted light to create beautiful patterns for a fascinated group of mixed-species youngsters. Quite the security risk, isn't it? Observer Kex of the Galactic Concordat commented, his exoskeletal plates clicking softly. So many vulnerable young in one location. That's why it's the most secure part of the embassy, Julia replied. Though we prefer to call it protected rather than secure. The difference matters. The exchange center had been her initiative, designed to demonstrate humanity's priorities to the galactic community. Some species had been hesitant at first, but the sight of their children safely playing together proved more persuasive than any diplomatic argument. A sudden tremor shook the station. Warning klaxons blared. Station integrity compromised in sectors 7 through 9, the AI announced. Gravitational stabilizers failing. Emergency protocols initiated. Julia's datapad lit up with alerts. The damaged sectors were 3 levels below the exchange center, but if the gravitational stabilizers failed completely. Begin evacuation procedures, she ordered, already moving toward the children. The embassy staff responded instantly, their training kicking in. Observer Kex watched in fascination as the humans' behavior transformed. The previously casual diplomatic staff moved with military precision, but their focus wasn't on protecting classified materials or securing diplomatic assets. Every action centered on protecting the children, all of them, regardless of species. Another violent tremor rocked the station. The artificial gravity flickered. Ambassador. Lieutenant Maria Torres, head of embassy security, called out. Structural integrity is failing faster than predicted. We have 7 minutes before total gravitational failure in this sector. Julia had already organized the evacuation, directing her staff to carry the younger children while guiding the older ones. The Veldari children's tentacles were intertwined to keep them together. A security officer gently cradled a Meridian child, careful not to damage its crystalline form. But the diplomatic archives, Kex protested. The secure communications equipment can be replaced, Julia cut him off. Children can't. The evacuation route to the emergency shuttles was cut off by structural damage. Julia made a quick decision. Through the embassy's private dock. We'll use the diplomatic vessel. That's a restricted human military craft, Kex noted, hurrying alongside her. Not anymore, it's not. They reached the dock as the gravity began to fail completely. The children, already frightened, began to panic as they started floating. The human staff immediately adapted, forming a human chain to guide the children safely to the ship. Julia was the last one aboard, pushing off from the dock just as the section behind them collapsed. The ship's artificial gravity engaged, bringing everyone gently to the deck. "Everyone all right?" she called out, looking over the mixed group of human and alien children. Staff members were comforting the frightened young ones, offering water and emergency rations from the ship's diplomatic stores. Ambassador, Lieutenant Torres approached with a damage report. The station's emergency systems are engaging, but sectors 7 through 12 are lost. Initial reports suggest a power core malfunction. Julia nodded, then turned to Observer Kex, who had been watching the humans' response with intense interest. "Observer, I apologize for commandeering you into an evacuation, but we needed everyone's help." The observer's plates shifted in what Julia had learned was an expression of deep thought. "Fascinating. Your entire embassy staff switched from diplomatic functions to protection and evacuation in seconds. No debates about jurisdiction, no concerns about diplomatic protocol. When children are in danger, everything else becomes secondary," Julia explained. "It's not just training, it's who we are." The ship's communication system crackled. Other evacuation ships were reporting in. The station's emergency systems had managed to contain the damage, and repairs would begin soon. Later, after all the children had been safely returned to their families, Julia received an unexpected message from the Galactic Concordat. Observer Kex had submitted his report on the incident, leading to a formal commendation for the human embassy's actions. More significantly, 12 species had submitted requests for human consultation on designing emergency protocols for their own facilities, particularly those involving young ones. Julia smiled as she watched the last family leave, a Meridian parent carefully carrying their crystalline child. The young one had insisted on giving her a parting gift, a small light pattern preserved in a crystal, representing the human concept of safety. "Computer, diplomatic log update," she spoke. "Today's incident, while dangerous, may have demonstrated humanity's principles more effectively than a year of formal diplomatic exchanges. Sometimes actions speak louder than words, especially when those actions involve protecting children, no matter their species." The embassy would be rebuilt, she knew. And this time, other species would be incorporating human-designed safety protocols into their own sections. The galaxy was learning that humanity's weakness for protecting the vulnerable was actually its greatest diplomatic asset. The warning beacons pulsed their crimson messages across the star lanes: caution, human protective zone, approach with extreme care, no threats to juveniles or dependents. Commander Raj Patel of the diplomatic vessel Star Bridge studied the growing network of warning markers with mixed emotions. In the past 3 months, 17 different species had begun placing these beacons along their borders with human space. "They're treating us like we're dangerous predators," Lieutenant Diana Frost remarked from her station, monitoring the latest beacon deployment by a Sorn vessel. "No," Raj corrected, "they're treating us like we're apex protectors. There's a difference." The Star Bridge had been assigned to investigate the growing phenomenon of alien species marking human territories with warning beacons. What had started as a few cautionary markers had evolved into an elaborate system of warnings, guidelines, and protocols for interacting with humans. A communication request flashed on the main screen. "Commander, incoming transmission from the Astral Diplomatic Corps," Diana reported. The screen filled with the complex geometric patterns that represented the astral hive mind's visual communication. Their translator rendered it into speech. "Greetings, Star Bridge. We are deploying additional warning markers along Trade Route 7 Alpha. Recent incidents necessitate clearer warnings about human protective responses." Raj leaned forward. "What incidents?" A Meridian trading vessel entered human space with damaged life support systems. 3 human ships abandoned their trade routes to assist. When informed of juvenile Meridians aboard, the humans insisted on escorting the vessel to their nearest station for repairs. "That sounds like a positive interaction," Raj noted. "The humans refused payment. They delayed their own missions. They expended resources. All for non-human juveniles. This behavior must be marked and warned of." Raj suppressed a smile. "Warned of? Or advertised?" A pause in the geometric patterns suggested the Astral were processing this perspective. "Clarify," they requested. "These beacons, they're not just warnings, are they? They're advertisements. Travel these routes and humans will protect your young. Establish colonies near these sectors and humans will aid your vulnerable. Trade in these zones and your children will be safe." The astral patterns shifted rapidly. "You perceive this as positive? Don't you? Your own beacons have the most detailed guidelines for ships carrying juvenile astral drones." Another long pause. The patterns reorganized themselves slowly. "We had not considered this interpretation. Our warnings were intended to prevent confusion. But analysis shows increased trade activity along human borders. Multiple species now route civilian transports through human-monitored spaces." Diana pulled up the trade route data on her screen. "Commander, they're right. Commercial traffic along our borders has increased 47% in the last 2 months. Civilian transport routes have been realigned to pass closer to human stations." The Astral continued, "Query, is this human protection available by formal arrangement?" "Formal arrangement?" Raj asked. "Other species wish to ensure human protective responses for their vulnerable populations. Would humans accept payment or trade agreements to extend protection?" Raj shook his head. "It doesn't work that way. We protect the vulnerable because it's right, not because we're paid to." The geometric patterns fragmented briefly, the astral equivalent of confusion. "This is inefficient. Protection should be quantified, negotiated." "Some things can't be quantified," Raj replied. "Would you put a price on your hive mind survival?" The patterns stilled. "No. That's how we feel about protecting the vulnerable. Any vulnerable being, not just our own." Later, in his quarters, Raj recorded his analysis for Earth Command. The warning beacons were transforming from cautionary markers into something else, galactic signposts advertising safe zones under human protection. "Computer, begin report," he spoke. "The galaxy's reaction to our protective instinct continues to evolve. What began as fear has become recognition. Species are no longer just warning others about us, they're advertising our presence as a safety feature of their trade routes and colonies. He paused, considering the implications. We're being treated as the galaxy's protective older sibling. Not entirely trusted or understood, but recognized as essential for safety. The beacons marking our space as dangerous are instead making it the safest place in the galaxy for the vulnerable. The Star Bridge continued its patrol, passing another cluster of warning beacons. Their crimson lights blinked across the hull, but their message was changing. With each passing day, they less resembled warnings and more resembled advertisements: human space, safe passage guaranteed, all vulnerable beings protected. The galaxy was learning that sometimes the most dangerous thing in space was the absence of humans and their protective instinct. The Grand Council chamber of the Galactic Concordat had changed in the 5 years since humanity's protective instinct first shocked the galaxy. The once austere hall now featured a children's observation gallery, protected by transparent barriers designed by human engineers. Young ones from various species watched the proceedings, a living reminder of what was at stake in galactic politics. Admiral Maya Patel, daughter of the famous ambassador Julia Patel, stood before the assembly. Behind her, holographic displays showed the latest statistics: piracy down 78% in human-patrolled sectors, civilian casualties in regional conflicts reduced by 89%, and unprecedented cooperation between traditionally hostile species in joint protection efforts. "The galaxy called us unpredictable," Maya began. "You marked our territories with warning beacons. You feared our irrational devotion to protecting the vulnerable. Today, those same beacons guide ships to safety. Those same protective instincts guard your children." The chamber had more representatives than ever before. Species that once avoided galactic politics now participated, knowing their vulnerable members would be protected during diplomatic missions. A Soran elder rose to speak. "When we first encountered humans, we thought their protective behavior was an evolutionary weakness. We were wrong. It is their greatest strength, and now, it is becoming ours." The elder gestured to a group of young Soran in the observation gallery. "For the first time in our history, we are raising all our young, not just the strongest. Human protection protocols have allowed us to nurture instead of cull. Our society is richer for it." The Meridian Collective's representative sparkled with agreement patterns. "Our trade routes near human space are now the safest in the galaxy. Ships carrying crystalline young ones deliberately divert to pass through human-protected sectors." Maya nodded. "Protection isn't weakness. It's the foundation of civilization. A species that guards its vulnerable members preserves its wisdom, nurtures its potential, and demonstrates its strength through compassion." The astral hive mind projected images of their newly designed colonies. "We have incorporated human protective architectures. Drone mortality has decreased 94%. Efficiency has increased. The hive mind grows stronger through preservation rather than replacement. But the true change," Maya continued, "isn't in our statistics or architectures. It's in how we all now view the vulnerable. They're not burdens to be culled or weaknesses to be hidden. They're treasures to be protected, potential to be nurtured." She gestured to the children's gallery. "Look up there. Veldari young ones teaching Soran children their art. Meridian crystals growing alongside human infants. Astral drones learning from every species' wisdom. This is the future we build when we protect instead of abandon." The Council's next vote was historic: the establishment of the Galactic Protection Force, a joint fleet dedicated to defending the vulnerable of all species. Human protective protocols would be its foundation, but every species would contribute its unique strengths. Later, in her private chambers aboard the flagship Guardian Dawn, Maya recorded the day's events. "Computer, begin personal log. Today marks a new chapter in galactic history. What began as fear of humanity's irrational, protective instinct has evolved into the galaxy's greatest strength. We're no longer seen as dangerous protectors, we're recognized as teachers, showing the galaxy that true civilization is measured not by its military might or technological advancement, but by how it treats its most vulnerable members. She paused, watching through her viewport as ships from a dozen species conducted joint protection exercises. Their different designs and capabilities now worked in harmony, united by a common purpose. Mother would be proud, she continued. Her children's cultural exchange center was the seed that grew into this. One human idea, that protecting the vulnerable makes us stronger, not weaker, has transformed galactic civilization. The Guardian Dawn passed a cluster of the old warning beacons. Their message had been updated one final time: entering protected space, all species, all children, all vulnerable welcomed and guarded. Maya smiled. Humanity's weakness had become the galaxy's strength. Their unpredictable, protective instinct had created unprecedented predictability and safety. And their irrational devotion to protecting the vulnerable had given birth to the most rational form of galactic cooperation ever achieved. In the observation gallery of the Guardian Dawn, just as in countless places across human-influenced space, children of all species played, learned, and grew together, protected by the combined strength of a galaxy that had finally learned humanity's most important lesson, that true strength lies not in the power to destroy, but in the will to protect.